It's great to have Jake here, somebody who's just been a complete pioneer in the nonprofit space. You're really taking some of the hardships that you've had in life and recognize that other people are having those in the veteran space and help them and give them new purpose with the movement that you created. So it's great to see what you're doing now. I'm happy to have you here. I'm looking forward to learning from you and sharing, having you share with others. Welcome.
Yeah, really appreciate it, Ben. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome. So when you were young, did you always aspire to go to the army, to become a Marine? Was that something you were thinking of? Like, how did that passion come about?
Yeah, I think it was something that I frequently thought about when I was young. It was something I certainly considered doing after high school in one way or another, whether it was enlisting straight out or going to one of the service academies. But kind of took a detour. I went to college instead, played football, but ended up, getting into the military upon graduation. When I graduated from school.
And did you think that you would, rise all the way to becoming a Marine and really do well in the sniper oriented program you were in? Did you think that those are things that you kind of like, hey, I wanted to do this, I'm going to excel at them? Like, how did that kind of progression happen?
I knew I wanted to be in the infantry, and I knew I wanted to be a Marine. So I chose to enlist into the Marine Corps. I chose the infantry. I don't think I joined aspiring to be a sniper, but I was a good Marine. I performed well overseas and was invited to try out for a sniper platoon, and took that opportunity. It was arduous and grueling and all of those things, and sniper school was terrible and hard and all of that. But I'm glad I did. It's an elite group, and I wanted to be among the best, and so that's what I joined.
Did you have aspirations even before that, like when you were younger, to kind of go tie your experiences in, or just do like go to that path first and then become more entrepreneurial? Was that kind of your thinking as well early on?
I think the part of my life that was military service was born of part mission and patriotism and service, but I don't think that I ever saw it as a stepping stone to entrepreneurship. I knew I always wanted to be an entrepreneur, but I didn't see those two things as connected until today, having started two companies. I can look back and say, yeah, I actually learned how to be an entrepreneur in the Marine Corps.
Right. Yeah. And what would you say is like the most valuable skill you learned from your experience being in Iraq, Afghanistan? Like, what would you say is the most important thing you learned?
I mean, it's really hard to say it's just one or two or three things. When I think about who I became as a person, the experience certainly opened up my eyes to the world and the hardship faced by people in other countries, and the blessings that we have as Americans that we should never take for granted. As perhaps from a business or an entrepreneurial angle, I mean, countless lessons. Never give up. Understanding how to improvise, adapt, and overcome when faced with hardship. Learning how to innovate with limited resources. Certainly, and then how to lead. How to lead people in tough situations, and that's what entrepreneurship is. It's pulling a team together and leading them through one of the most uncertain, chaotic, risky environments imaginable. It's not risky in terms of life and death, but it's certainly risky in terms of livelihood.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you, but like in terms of the comparison of like the risk you take every day running a business, is there any kind of like is it comparable at all to a life and death situation, anything like that? It's just not. Is it just so far from it removed in terms of your decision making?
I mean, the stakes are not even close. I mean, we were running sniper missions behind enemy lines in probably the most kinetic and violent province of Afghanistan for 7 months. Like every night we went outside the wire, it was life and death, and in very real terms. So the stakes are different, but the presence of risk, the complexity of the risk, is very similar, right? You talk about what's the environment? It's a resource starved environment with limited information, a competitive landscape. Now, the competitive landscape in software doesn't have guns and IEDs, but they can still spring a surprise on you and kind of ambush you in your go to market. So I think one thing that veterans bring to business and to entrepreneurship is that they don't fear risk. They respect risk. They understand risk. They can navigate risk. They don't fear it. And I think that's really a healthy place, a healthy mindset to have when you're trying to build a company.
And why did you decide to go the nonprofit route for the first, your first major venture in a sense? Like, why not just create like a business that was for profit and capitalize on deploying these volunteers, etc.?
Yeah, so the first company I started when I got out, I started by accident. It was called Team Rubicon. It is called Team Rubicon. It still exists and is thriving today. I say it started by accident because I had no intention of starting it. It started when I ran a ad hoc response to the Haiti earthquake that kind of snowballed into a movement that I ended up running for 11 and a half years. And that movement was a global disaster response and humanitarian relief organization that recruits, trains, and deploys military veterans. And, I don't think we ever envisioned that it would scale to what it became. But like I said, over the course of 11 years, we scaled to 150,000 volunteers. We responded to 1,200 different disasters and crises and raised $400 million in philanthropy. So, you kind of look back and you're like, holy hell, what a ride. But yeah, I mean, it wasn't by design. And I think that that's where a lot of good entrepreneurial ideas happen. You encounter a moment, a situation, a problem, you develop a solution, and then you kind of stick around for the ride.
Right. And you seem to be so good with Team Rubicon at getting volunteers and recruiting people. Like, what were some of the methods that you used to do that?
Uh, you know, we I'd say there were a couple things we could credit. One, we had a compelling mission. It was something that people wanted to be a part of because we were creating impact. We were helping people on their worst day. And listen, that's an inspiring thing to be a part of. But we were effective. We knew that in order to be the best disaster response organization in the world, we had to provide the best volunteer experience in the world. And the best volunteer experience doesn't mean like white glove service. It doesn't mean that everybody's eating steak and lobster at night and sleeping on, a king size bed. In fact, for us, it was the opposite. It was like, we need to recreate the hardship. We need to put these people into what the Marine Corps would call the suck, but we needed to provide them with the tools that they needed, good leadership, the opportunity to have impact. And if we did that, got them dirty every single day, they were going to come back for more. So that's what we focused on. And then lastly, it was storytelling. How do you tell a compelling story? And that, I think any entrepreneur also needs to be the chief storyteller of their organization. How do you compel investors or customers to come along for the journey and take a risk alongside you? And we tried to become great storytellers early.
And what were these like people that, let's just say you have somebody who's a veteran that, they have this time on their hands where was this like Team Rubicon, was that becoming like their main thing that they were doing? Like, it seemed to be like they were lacking, there's a lot of them that were lacking a certain purpose. There wasn't any other need, and this was the only need in a sense.
I mean, our volunteer base was so diverse; it was unbelievable. We had people that were, retired from the military in maybe their mid 50s, early 60s, all the time in the world because they were collecting that military pension, and so yeah, they were like professional disaster responders for us. We had other people that, were fully employed, earning a paycheck, but would use their PTO to go to a disaster zone and volunteer. And it was because in some cases they were looking for purpose. Maybe their day job wasn't doing it for them. In other cases, it was just, hey, I've got this skill set that I earned or learned when I was in the military, and I want to continue to put it to use. And everything in between: rich people, poor people, white people, black people, men, women, every race. I mean, it was really remarkable how diverse the backgrounds of our volunteers were.
And what do you think set your disaster response apart from maybe other organizations that are out there?
I mean, I think part of it was this military efficiency that we brought. We built systems that could scale. We focused on interoperability with existing frameworks and government agencies. We were committed to outcomes. I think up until we showed up, volunteers, this concept of volunteers in a disaster zone was almost like a four-letter word. The professionals, the government officials, they saw volunteers as like a part of the problem. And we were committed to making volunteering in disaster zones a part of the solution.
Yeah. And based on your experience with attracting donors, right? You've raised like over $300 million for this movement. So, what were some of the ways that you went about getting just the average person, maybe a couple dollar donation online?
We had all sorts of sources. I mean, we raised grassroots money, like you mentioned there. We raised money from billionaire family offices, companies, cause marketing budgets, foundations, and everything in between. The common thread across all of them was storytelling. Going back to the same way that we motivated and inspired volunteers is how we motivated and inspired donors. These are people that are investing hard-earned dollars into a cause with no expectation of return. It's a lot different than a VC cutting a check into an early stage startup, right? They know they're not getting their money back. So what do? You have to show that their donation creates impact, that it's helping someone tangibly, and they need to feel good about that. So, we focused on those things, and I think we were good at that. The proof's in the pudding. We've grown every year over year until, this past year we eclipsed $100 million in budget, which is unfathomable to me.
Do you think that it's essential for every corporation, whether nonprofit, for profit, et cetera, to have this purpose behind it? Like, of course, storytelling in this arc is important, but to have like a deeper purpose, like what you did with Team Rubicon, do you think that's essential?
I think if you want to compete today for today's workforce, Gen Z, millennial employees who, have demonstrated throughout their young careers that they want to do more than just maximize shareholder value, I think the answer is yes. People want to be a part of something that is inspiring, and stamping widgets can be inspiring if the widget helps the world. Otherwise, how else do you meet those employees in that newfound expectation for purpose alongside profit? It's part of the thesis that inspired us to start Groundswell 2.5 years ago. It's how do you unlock that a purposeful employee experience, help them to give back more effectively and efficiently. So we're certainly betting my next company on it.
Yeah. So it seemed like you took there was one point where you became like an impact advisory board member for DocuSign. So kind of taking the purpose driven approach and channeling it towards another corporation. Was it at that point, Jake, that you kind of realized, hey, we should create our own venture for this that we can apply to many different types of businesses with what you mentioned before?
Yeah, it was an interesting experience to be on the advisory board at DocuSign at a period before they went public, where their CEO at the time, Keith Kroc, was really committed to this idea of social impact, and being brought in by this woman, Amy Skeeters-Barons, who's kind of a legend in this CSR space, to help just think through, like, how does DocuSign quantify the impact that it's having? You think about a software company like DocuSign, how many hundreds of millions of trees has it saved over the course of its existence by people not sending physical contracts for signature? It's kind of like unfathomable, the emissions costs that have been saved by not sending that FedEx envelope across the country for that very same signature. It's really fascinating. Then how do you not just quantify it, but tell that story? You tell that story externally to inspire your customers, but also internally, so that, again, your employees don't just feel like they're creating widgets, digital widgets in this case. So that was an important, I think, period of time for me, and certainly one that I look on as kind of like formative in my understanding of corporate social responsibility.
And Jake, did you feel that your mission at Team Rubicon was accomplished, and now you wanted to start something different, or did you kind of like what was like the catalyst in a sense of wanting to do something different? Because you already established yourself with Team Rubicon, you didn't need to go and maybe create something that was different. Maybe it was just different purpose you wanted, or something like that.
Yeah, it's a great question. I had the greatest job in the history of the world running Team Rubicon. It was a privilege and honor to lead it. I'm a big believer, and I've said this since day one at Team Rubicon. Organizations are just like any living organism. They need to be slowly evolving, or they're slowly dying. And so that evolution is systems and policies and process and culture and all of that, but it's also the people. And I always felt like there was going to be a time when I was going to no longer be the right person to run Team Rubicon. And, maybe somebody would debate. There's probably people that would debate I should have stepped away earlier. There's maybe some people that would debate I shouldn't have stepped away when I did. But, we had just gotten through the first year of COVID. I knew that the organization was going to need to fundamentally change in the post-COVID world as we came back to offices and things like that. And I just felt like it was the natural departure point. We had a succession plan in place, and listen, at the end of the day, I'm also an entrepreneur at heart. and I wanted to be an entrepreneur again. I didn't want to just be a CEO. I wanted to be an entrepreneur again.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, you have to reach a point where you want to just build something new and start over. It's always a journey each time. But so you have this, you kind of created this like HSA for charity, account. What is the major advantage of structuring it like that for employees?
Yeah. So what Groundswell's done that's really unique is we've taken a tax advantaged giving account that historically have only been available to high net worth clients of wealth management firms. It's something called a donor advised fund. And the mechanics of it don't matter so much that other than we've built a platform that has lowered the cost of providing these. And then what that platform does, we sell to companies, they provide these to their employees. And so each employee gets this charitable giving account. They can channel all of their personal philanthropy through it, but we've automated employers' ability to give or match funds into it. So you said HSA for charity. You can also think of it like a 401k for charity. It's a tax advantage vehicle purpose built for retirement, health, in this case for charitable giving. And so, the platform we've built reduces the administrative burden of running employee giving programs. It improves the outcomes for nonprofits, and it's just a better experience for employees.
And do you just think that there's not enough tools to essentially democratize the ease of of this kind of charitable portion for businesses and for employees? Do you just think that there's not enough tools currently out there, or is it more the process isn't simple enough?
Well, I mean, I'm going to be totally blunt. The existing tools suck. 65% of Fortune 500 companies have employee giving programs. Most of them are administered through one of three legacy platforms. Those legacy platforms, are administratively burdensome for the corporate admins. They are, I would say, poor experiences for the employees. And the nonprofits who are receiving the funds are often waiting 90 to 180 days to get that money. And I experienced this firsthand when I was running Team Rubicon. I can remember hurricanes hitting, and we were planning operations, and you plan those operations according to what your initial fundraising numbers are. So we'd be planning and executing these operations. 4 months after the hurricane hit, I'd get a literal stack of checks, hundreds, thousands of checks from employee matching programs, sometimes $500,000, $1 million that was totally unaccounted for because it took so long to reach us. Like, that fundamentally changes the operating plan that we have 4 months after the fact. Like, there's got to be a better way. So those are the types of things that we're solving for.
Has there been like an approach you guys have thought about for right now the current situation in Maui?
Well, I mean, first of all, the situation in Maui is horrific,
Yeah.
and the numbers are probably going to get worse before they get better. Team
Hmm.
Rubicon's, fortunately on the ground. One of our big donors, longtime supporter, Bob Parsons, who was the founder of GoDaddy, donated $1 million to Team Rubicon's efforts. The reality is there's not much right now that non-governmental organizations can do. This is still a search and not rescue mission, but search and recovery mission. 75% of the search area is yet to be searched. And so organizations like ours are standing by to help with the long-term recovery component of this. But unfortunately, there's not much to salvage in that situation. But one of the things that Groundswell tries to do, you see an event like Maui, horrific, urgent, and citizens across America in that moment, as they're watching those images on CNN, are compelled to want to help.
Right.
They say, I want to do something. But then in the very next moment, they say, I don't know the first thing about where to give to a wildfire response in Maui, or the war in Ukraine, or an earthquake in Turkey. And so there's this moment of inspiration, and it's followed by this moment of friction. The friction is, I don't actually know what to do. And so that's part of what our app with Groundswell solves for is, we can immediately put up a portfolio of causes that we know are on the ground. And, with a tap of a thumb, an employee or a donor can send funds directly to a qualified vetted charity that, again, we know is doing work on the ground. And so you eliminate that friction in the experience. You eliminate the excuses not to act in that moment of inspiration.
Do you think that when a disaster like Maui, the whole situation there occurs, right? Like what's the quickest way to go and funnel that from people that have these emotions and they feel like that, they feel, horrible for it. What's the quickest way to funnel them if maybe they don't know about the Groundswell app, if they, are unaware of the right way? Because there's a lot of people, there's probably a huge market out there, Jake, of individuals that haven't necessarily been able to donate yet because they're still unaware. Is that just through more ads and et cetera?
Well, listen, I think, everybody should know that there's like some really easy ways to like identify a good place to send your money. There's good national organizations who are likely going to be on the ground. Team Rubicon is one of them. The Red Cross, Salvation Army, they generally do good work. But if you want to go someplace that's more local, and again, Team Rubicon's unique because it's a national organization that's ultimately local. We've got 1,000, 3,000 volunteers in Hawaii, so we're local to Hawaii. But you look at what's the community foundation. So where, donate to the Maui Community Foundation. They will know the local players to distribute those funds to, and donate to the local food bank, right? Disasters like this exacerbate social issues. So if somebody was already hungry before this wildfire, guess what? They're hungrier now. If somebody was already experiencing domestic violence before this disaster, guess what? Like their household just got a lot more violent. So, anything that is local that was delivering services beforehand, just plow more money in because their services are going to be needed fivefold from before the disaster.
And why do you think that your purpose is so intertwined with both these different businesses? Like, is it just because of the experiences you had when you were abroad, or other things you experienced when you were like a child? Like, why do you think that this is kind of your purpose of helping other people, this kind of volunteer oriented, charity oriented work?
I never expected to be in this line of work, to be honest. Again, I knew I wanted to serve in the military. I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I never thought I'd be an entrepreneur that was focused on the social impact space. But my time overseas certainly shaped my worldview. As I mentioned earlier, I saw the impact of things like poverty on the rise of extremism in young men. I saw the impact of radical ideology on young women, and everything in between. And so I think, I understand that we have a role to play in this world to make it better for the people that are less fortunate than we are, and that's everybody from Afghanistan to Albany, New York, right? We can all do something. I'm lucky that I, get to earn a paycheck in something that is purposeful. Not everybody's that fortunate, but like everybody can do something.
Do you think there are new technologies like that you're looking at, like maybe like blockchain, for example, that could streamline certain processes of donations, or maybe make it easier for, like maybe there's certain places that people would like to fund from that could use cryptocurrency to fund? Like, have you kind of been exploring some of these new technologies, and like, what would you say are some of them that you're looking at implementing?
Yeah, we've always been tried to be on the leading edge of innovation, both at Team Rubicon, obviously here at Groundswell. Team Rubicon was one of the first NGOs to take crypto. We took a $75,000 crypto donation back in 2013, which we probably should have sat on because it would have been worth a lot more. But yeah, I mean, listen, I think that there are opportunities there. Some interesting applications for blockchain that have been explored in the humanitarian space, specifically around validation of resourcing and supply chains, which I think are interesting applications. Like being able to validate who has what is really critical early in the planning process for complex disasters. When you think about Groundswell, crypto's been up and down. Recent crypto winter, all that stuff. We've looked at some integrations with things like the Giving Block, which allows people to donate cryptocurrency. And so if you've got someone who's sitting on some highly appreciated cryptocurrency, I don't know if those people exist anymore or not, but certainly there's some significant tax implications to donating that cryptocurrency, and taking the full value of that write off against your cost basis. So all things that we're evaluating.
And do you think that there's any like, do you think like ChatGPT can help disrupt this area and maybe streamline the ability for donations to be given? Like, do you think, like, where do you see an angle for that technology to be applied to this area?
I mean, absolutely. I think one of the things I've observed is that people are intimidated by philanthropy. They don't know where to start. And so, getting smart about some prompts into something like, ChatGPT, Bard, what have you, and saying like, hey, I really care about animals, specifically Himalayan cats, and I would prefer to invest in organizations that have smaller budgets so that my gift is more meaningful. I happen to live in Los Angeles, but I often travel to Topeka, Kansas, and I would love to support an organization run by a minority female. Like, okay, like cool, like you probably get an answer in 10 seconds on that, whereas you'd be looking forever to try to find something meets those criteria. So I think there are some interesting applications for people to explore.
And you've done a bunch of different things throughout your career so far. Like, where do you see the next 10 years playing out? Do you see like yourself building up Groundswell? Do you see yourself doing a different venture during that time? Like, what do you kind of think is next?
Yeah, I mean, I remain chairman of the board at Team Rubicon. I'm excited to stay, involved with that organization through the next decade. With Groundswell, we're thinking about the next 10 months. How do we position the company to go raise the money we need to raise to get to the next level? I don't afford myself the luxury of thinking about life after Groundswell. I've got to make this work, and I've got to do it without, letting my family down. So I've got some important things to balance. That's really all I can think about.
100%. Well, I mean, that's all the questions I had here, Jake. I appreciate you coming on. I think you have an incredible story, and you've really created a movement, and materialized a movement that was existing in a sense. So it's great to to see what you've done, and I'm excited for what you'll accomplish next. Appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. Thanks for telling the story.